Okay, one more time. Please take your seat. We would like to start. I welcome all of you to the public part of this Progressive Governance Symposium. My name is Michael Miebach. I'm the Deputy Chairman of Das Progressive Zentrum. And not all of you know what this conference series is about. It's a conference series called Progressive Governance Conferences that originated at the late 90s, and it was usually hosted by a think tank called Policy Network in London. And we as the Progressive Center, we are very proud that we were able to live up to this tradition, and we are trying to hold up the tradition for the second time now since 2017. And I also want to say that we are very honored that we were able to manage to get, from a German perspective, and for the international audience, I would like to say that we are very honored that we were able to get two of the most successful and influential German politicians here tonight, which is Robert Habeck from the Green Party co-leader. He's sitting over there. Please welcome him. And Stephan Weil, the Prime Minister for Lower Saxony, he will join us a little bit later. Why are we doing this? We feel that now more than ever is the time for the progressive community to come together and exchange ideas. It was hard work to organize this day. I would like to thank especially Dominik Schwickert, the director of Progressives Zentrum, and his team to make this day possible. Let me take the time to make two remarks. One of the first progressive governance conferences that I personally was able to attend was in 2009 in Chile. That was almost exactly to the day 10 years ago. It was a marvelous conference in Valparaiso. If you've never been there, it's beautiful, go there. In this conference, the participants were Joe Biden, the Vice President of the USA, Michelle Bachelet, the President of Chile back then, Gordon Brown, Prime Minister of the UK, Lula, President of Brazil, and among others, Jens Stoltenberg, Prime Minister of Norway. 10 years later now, none of them is still in office, and we have right-wing populist governments in the US and in Brazil, and we have conservative governments in all other three countries that I was just mentioning. So why am I explaining this? As we all know, this shows what we all know, that center-left parties have been in decline in the last decade. And there are many reasons for this. And one particular reason I would like to call the progressive paradox. What do I mean by progressive paradox? On the one hand, the need for comprehensive reforms in different policy fields in our societies, in our countries, is bigger than ever, be it to adapt to changes in our economies, the challenges of global warming or migration. So this is the one hand. On the other hand, the conditions for pushing forward a reform agenda have been worsened tremendously in the last decade. I would like to mention just three obstacles as a starting point for our discussion later. The first obstacle, as I see it, is that our societies have become more fragmented in the last decades, and so have many party systems. And this leads to the fact that in many party systems, one center-left party alone cannot do it anymore. We need allies, we need partners, and that is why we broadened up this conference series and brought together people from different parties, progressive liberals, Greens, from the left party, and so on. Second obstacle to a progressive agenda is, of course, the right-wing populism that we are witnessing in all of our societies, or most of our societies, which are putting democratic institutions themselves under pressure. So, as progressives, we not only have to come up with new ideas, we not only have to win or try to win majorities, we also have to defend democracy itself, which is, of course, time-consuming and costs a lot of energy. Third obstacle, and I come to an end already, is maybe the most difficult for progressives like us. And this is that while there's an abstract desire among the populations for change, we have been discussing this throughout the day. There's a study that you find out there that describes that people actually think things need to change in a certain way. But still, in many countries, and also in Germany, many people do not believe that there will be progress. There's a recent study of the Allensbach Institute, and it says that the share of Germans believing that mankind is developing to an ever better future was 56% in the late 60s and went down, especially in the last decade, tremendously to now 32%. So this is the lowest proportion of progressive thinking in Germany in the last 5 decades. And there's also the problem that many people not only believe that progress is not don't believe that progress is possible at all, they also think that politics cannot come about with progress or is not willing to do so. Interestingly, there's a study published today by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, which finds that now really listen to this, I couldn't believe it, 46% of interviewed people say they believe that there are secret organizations influencing political decisions, and 33% say that politicians are just puppets of underlying powers. So, to wrap up, are those bad times for progressives? Are we doomed, so to speak? We as the Progressive Zentrum, we don't think so. We believe that times are tough, but that we ourselves can do better. It is up to us. That's the point that we would like to make today. So we need to be pushing for change because it's part of our DNA, but we have to do it in a smarter, in a more interesting, a more regardful, more convincing way. We need to stop, we believe, the infighting between center-left parties and allow each other the space each party needs in order to reach overall progressive majorities. We need to learn from positive examples, and we learned today that there are many examples. We need to build more intense networks, we need to become younger, more diverse, we need to reach out to the broad spectrum of civil society movements and activists. And my last point, and we are very proud that this happened today, we need to again strengthen the transatlantic ties. It is very sad, it's a pity that Congressman Tim Ryan needed to cancel his trip to Germany on very short notice due to the political circumstances in the US. But it is very promising that so many of our American friends came all the way to Berlin today. So there are many reasons to be optimistic, and it would be great if this positive signal came out of the conference today. So this was my first initial statement. Thank you very much. I would now like to invite Maja Göpel and Jean Pisani-Ferry on stage.
Should I just start talking?
No, I'll ask you something first. Maja has been around at the conference throughout the day, and I would like to know from her what was her main takeaway.
Good evening. I'm very happy to see so many of you here tonight, and I will try to get the positives out, right? And I'm also very happy to be here because I first came 2 years ago, I think, when it was an urgency call. Someone had stepped out of a panel on justice. And I remember Dominic calling me up, I know justice isn't really at the core of your sustainability thinking, but maybe you could still step in. I was like, hold on, there is something that we need to bridge. And that is the bridge between the environmental and the social, as being two coins of the same side of any progressive agenda that we can talk of as being progressive today. And I think the recent protests have just put more emphasis on this, and this is the kind of angle from which I've been observing the day, and I was very happy that there was an entire panel this afternoon also on just transitions and how do we get into a better energy system and tackle climate change. I also would like to pick up Matthew Taylor's framing from this morning, because he said when we look at research from all different disciplines, there's basically 3 ingredients that make up a successful organization or a successful institution. And one is about hierarchy, then there's a values base, and then there's a degree of individualism. And when those are well balanced, then the institution and the organization can bring about really good change and really deliver on its purpose. And typically we have allocated the authority to the state and then the legitimacy and values to civil society, and the markets are more the mechanism of bringing out individualism. And I think that is the first message, also to start thinking in alliances that don't fall into the trap of saying, oh, the state has to do this, and then the markets or the economy can do that. There's always a variety of business players. There's always a variety of political parties and ideas about what should be brought about. So how do we combine those assets? And the final bit that he nailed it down to was 3 elements, and I want to use those as a reference then to kind of gel my environmental perspective. One is we need missions that will mobilize people. And missions being something that bring back more the concerns of individuals and of humans into the way of policy making. And this is one of the big challenges for the EU, where a lot of people feel even more remote probably from what is happening there than you've just pointed out. Interestingly, I think it speaks also to the kind of concerns that you've been putting out in the study as of today. So how do we make sure that it doesn't feel detached and manipulated from the people? Then we need a new idea of individualism, one that is not so fundamentalist as we might have had it, and the marketization of basically all of our relationships, to really think about which type of relationships might we want to demarketize a little bit. And then the need for new democratic innovation and the renewing of the hierarchical leadership legitimacy. So what is it? Which kind of institutions and governance can be leading this change and this transformation today? And as a scientist that likes to look at how people make sense of the world, I would like to put forward a few observations to just wrap up and lead us into the discussion, to really think about the discursive face of politics. I think we've had it in a few moments today. How do we describe things? What are the words that we use? This is going to open up an imaginary space in people's heads, and it is going to invite value judgments. And this is why it is really important to think about how do we frame those missions. And I think it does cut short, and we had it in some of the panels, to try to use the old metrics, the undifferentiated way of saying growth, the undifferentiated way of saying productivity gains, in order to justify progressive politics. And that's been a challenge that we've had, the structural power of the status quo, just because it's there, with the reference frameworks and the indicators and the metrics of what is successful, they are there, and everything that wants to deviate from that has to argue why the deviation is not going to be hampering, and use the benchmarks that are part of shaping and expressing the status quo. So we have to say our idea of the future is not going to be expressed by the same metrics. This mission needs new way of measuring and of valuing, and we have to put those forward to say this is where the solutions lie. And the ones that are saying that want to keep the system as it is, they should tell us how that impacts our metrics of a progressive solution that is socially and environmentally sound. And then for the new idea of individualism, we talked about this, and I think there is an interesting overlap that came between decarbonization and digitalization, which is really that we need to have an individualism that is connoted with something that you are part of something bigger. It can be what Antonio Kwame Appiah calls the rooted globalism or rooted cosmopolitanism, so some degree of feeling responsible for, also for the elites that have the possibilities to float around the globe. And at the same time, the leave no one behind agenda that we talk about in the just transition and the sustainable development goals. And when we see at the antagonism against the changes, we do see a little bit of the same patterns in digitalization, where we saw a lot of the people in the productive manufacturing really don't liking that type of progress, and the decarbonization were obviously the people falling behind when we are changing those kinds of jobs. So how do we make sustainable business models? How do we show those? How do we measure those? What are the reporting schemes? How do we make sure that everybody can make a sustainable living in the future? And how do we avoid the sentiments of being transformed in inviting everyone that's most affected into being part of the transformers? And with this is the final bit, the democratic innovation. How do we get out of the dictatorship of the present, of having to argue against old, outdated metrics and very economistic mindsets? How do we invite in something bigger? And how do we make sure that the stories that are being told, and I think this is something I'd love the political panel to address. My feeling is that a lot of the people don't believe the stories of everything can be staying more or less the same anymore anyway. So how do we honestly say what has to change and then find the coalitions that reliably are going to go for that target whilst constantly adapting to include the people's concerns that are affected most? So that would be for me the progressive story for the future.
Thank you very much for this very energetic and dense. Is this working? Yeah. I would now introduce Jean Pisani-Ferry. The funny thing was, he has been around in major government positions, both in France and in think tank positions in Europe. Many of you know him. And I asked him, what do you want to talk about? And he said, I want to talk about climate change and how the people react to it. So it fits perfectly with Maja. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you. I think I know the reason why you invited me, because when you spoke about pessimism in Germany and about conspiracy theories, you needed someone who comes from a country where things are worse. So I'm here. I can tell you it can be worse. No, I wanted to talk about climate change because I wanted to talk about something, you know, about which we have to think hard because it's critical and because it's difficult. It's critical because it has to do with the view about the future, about progress, and it's difficult because we're seeing how easy it is to have a split between the people who care about the end of the world and the people who worry about the end of the month. And that's exactly what we're seeing, we've seen happening in France with the divide between those who took the roundabouts because they didn't want to pay the carbon tax and those who said we need to act and we need to act now. So first question is what to do about that exactly. Who should pay for the transition? And I think we do need a carbon tax. This is essential. I mean, you're not going to change your behavior if the prices give you the wrong signal. You're not going to change your heating system. You're not going to change your car. You need the prices. But at the same time, those taxes are extremely regressive. So there needs to be a way to compensate people. The US proposal for carbon dividends is very interesting. Essentially to give back the entire proceeds from the carbon taxation to the people on a per capita basis. So this can correct the distributional bias, the inequality bias in the carbon taxation. But there are many other dimensions for people, for example, people who live in cities, in places where they're much more dependent on carbon, on car, on heating, etc. So there needs to be ways to redistribute. And I think there needs to be a clear proposal. Otherwise, we're not going to have carbon taxation. It's going to be defeated. And without carbon taxation, we're not going to succeed in the transition. So that was my first point. My second point is a very un-German one. We're here in a country that's obsessed about schwarze Null. Now, Germany borrows at 0.03% on 10-year bonds. So not 3%, not 0.3%, but 0.03%. So zero, okay? Inflation exists. I mean, it's somewhere between 1% and 2%. It means Germany borrows at negative rate. And there is no discussion about how to share the burden between today and tomorrow, between the present generation and the future generation. Now, are we sure that the future generation will be happy to inherit a deteriorated environment, but perfectly healthy public finances. I mean, are we sure? I don't think it makes, in principle, economic sense. So I think we need to have a serious discussion about how to share the burden across generations. And especially in this kind of environment in which we have a window of extremely low interest rate. It's not going to last forever. So I don't want us to regret in 10 years, 20 years, say, oh, we had this window, we didn't use it. It doesn't mean fiscal profligacy. It doesn't mean, to use it as a pretext for overspending, but it means a serious discussion about that. My last point is perhaps a tribute to the American friends who are here. I'm deeply convinced that by the day the US changes position on climate change and joins the Paris Agreement, a nanosecond later, they will start talking about border tax adjustment, about saying we're not going to let people who don't participate in the effort against climate change, just sell us on the cheap goods that have been produced, with carbon emission. So we need a serious discussion on the linkages between climate change and international trade. And this is very delicate in this type of environment in which we are seeing the rise of protectionism. It shouldn't be left to the protectionists, but those who care about both a multilateral system, a rule-based order, and climate change should have a serious discussion about the role for border tax adjustment. It shouldn't be left aside. So 3 hard problems: the distributional effect of taxes, the burden sharing across generation, and the international dimension. And I think we're not yet at a point where we can see there are clear ideas about those 3 issues. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Yes, thank you very much. I would now like to come on stage for the first panel. Anneliese Dotz, Rainer Hoffmann, Robert Habeck, and Michael Wirtz. And this will be chaired by Sudha David Wilp. And I'll give you the floor here.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Sudha, and I'm with the German Marshall Fund of the United States. One thing I've learned today is that progressives really like to have compact, fast panels. I've got about 45 minutes with this expert panel. Most of you have been here throughout the day, and you've talked about the challenges that democratic societies are facing on both sides of the Atlantic, and we had a great sum up from our experts just now. So I'm going to get right to it. I'm going to ask a few questions to each of the panelists and then open it up to Q&A. And I'm going to start with Robert Habeck. Mr. Habeck, I mean, you represent the Green Party, and I'd like to know, when you talk to voters, how do you talk about sustainability and economic growth? I mean, most voters, I think they're mutually exclusive. How do you let them know that it's possible to be sustainable and also achieve economic growth?
Hi, everyone. Well, when I talk to in Green Party environment about sustainability, I always get applause. That is not the problem. The problem is that the ones who are afraid of the change, another change, an ecological change in infrastructure, that they don't listen. And coming back to the question of this panel, the question is, why is that so? I agree completely with what John has said, with the 3 measures, how we can adopt the change, but we need a majority. We need a political force to do so. And how do we get that? And maybe there we have to come back to the source of the problem, or the urge of the problem. I think at the heart, at least in Europe, lies the finances crisis of the euro still. And it was the austerity policy that destroyed the faith in the political class, if you want to say so. So there was a feeling of the welfare state cannot protect me, and I lose my job, I lose my wages, I lose my social security, and so on. And now another change is coming, ecological change, digitalization, and so on. And if we don't give back the trust in the political ability to protect people also from change, to give them security, we always talk in the progressive milieu. There we have applause. In the Green Party, everyone is for the ecological change and the big transformation. But this would not be enough, but still is dividing the society. So this is what Michael said in the beginning, that progress in itself is a paradox. We have a lot of progress, we can go further, we can change, we know what to do, but the more we know, the more progress we want, the bigger grows the withstand against it. And to change that, to break this withstand, we have to talk about social justice and good organized welfare state, I think.
And actually, that sort of leads to my next question, because the Green Party is surging here in Germany, and perhaps you have a chance to be a kingmaker in the next federal government. But you addressed it yourself. I mean, you do just speak to certain segments of the society. Do you think you could expand your tent? Is there a possibility to do that so that you can make more voters embrace change with a progressive blueprint for the future?
Well, the one point is that social security is an issue, and even the people in the middle class people are afraid of losing their wealth they have now. They are not poor, but they are afraid of getting in disruption. But on the other hand, I think it's not only the economy. It's not only the economy stupid. It's about dignity and recognition. That you have to tell a story, to explain what is happening in the world, and do it not only for your small group of people, but telling a story of that also the ones who are losing their jobs in the automobile industry, for example, or the coal mines, for example, they are needed. They are part of the society. And this is what we have learned, or what we are trying to learn, we the Greens, that we are not pointing finger and saying, well, we know what is right, and it's your fault that you haven't committed to the change the last 10 years. See what's happening now, you're getting unemployed. That we should not do anymore, and hopefully we haven't done it so strong, but still we have to build up a new we identity, and this should include the ones who are against the change. So there should not be a point of talking about them, but talking with them.
I mean, maybe you can address that change. I mean, this, like you said, the title is about transformation. What are the trigger points in Germany right now when you think about change and what people are apprehensive about here?
Well, I give you another example, but this had nothing to do with ecological change. I was minister in Schleswig-Holstein, this is the northernmost part of Germany, also for the fishermen. Yeah, fishermen, I think you don't know much about fishery, but they have to adapt to the ecological change as well. And they hate green ministers. I'm not their friend. But when I said to them, you are part of the tradition of the country, you build the identity of this country, and I want you to be part in the future of this identity as well. Of course, you have to change, but let me talk with you about how many money you need, what kind of ships you need. Then they were beginning to listening to me, and I think this is the same we have to do with these. Well, the people in Eastern Germany who are afraid of losing their job because of we are getting rid of the liquid coal, and to give them a part even in the future, and to give it respectfully. Well, this is hard for my party as well, as this German we was never part of our history. We were the left-wing small group of the ones who knew it better all the time. But now I'm talking about something that's called left-wing patriotism or something like that. We need a common ground, including the ones who are not now opposing this change and progressive change.
Okay, I'm going to stick with Germany and then move my way west with this panel. So I'm going to turn to Rainer Hoffmann, who's chairman of the DGB here. What do you think about left-wing politics? Do you think it's the duty for people in the center left to address the people that feel abandoned? I mean, that have fled to perhaps the fringes, to right-wing populism or even left-wing populism? Do you think it's a duty for politicians like Robert Habeck to bring them back into the fold?
Yes, certainly. It's a huge necessity to bring people back. And if we talk about transition, what are the fears of workers? What are the fears of citizens? And we learned the lessons in Germany over the last 2-3 years that we can't be satisfied and certainly not be happy that right-wing parties are on the increase. And this has to do, amongst other things, with uncertainty. And people feel uncertain, as Robert Habeck said, in the process of change, that they will not fall behind, that we take them with us. And I think we have learned a lot of lessons, especially the trade unions and the workers are well aware that we have to fight for decent jobs. Decent jobs also in this quite complex process of transition. And transition is driven by globalization, digitalization, ecological change, climate change. So, and as Robert said, people getting uncertain. What will happen with me in the future? They are quite wealthy for the time being, but will I have a decent job in the next 5-10 years? Will my kids have a decent job? And what we have learned, for example, that approximately 300,000 new jobs have been created in the renewable industry sector. But in comparison to the classical industry sector, they are less well paid, longer working time, not so good working conditions. And here this was the reason why we are started also to rebuild our relations with political parties, also with the Greens. That is a couple of weeks ago that we met together with the top leaders of the Green Party, with the DGB board, and we reflected what will happen in this process of transition. And one element to give people more security is that they have decent jobs, and decent job means that they are well paid, that they have decent working conditions. And one of the preconditions for having decent jobs is that they are sheltered by collective agreements. But what we are experiencing over the last decades, that the coverage of collective bargaining is on the decline. So what can we do, especially in this process of change, if we're going towards new sectors, new industries, that they are also covered by decent jobs? And on this, at the same time, it's a lesson we learned, that sustainability has always to build upon 3 strong pillars. The ecological pillar, for sure, but it has also to be economically sustainable, and last not least, it has to be social sustainable. And how we bring these 3 pillars together. Sometimes we have a clear clash of interests. We have to discover the reasons and build upon new trust. And new trust can be built upon new relationships and creating progressive majorities for decent jobs, a better world, and at the same time to fighting successfully climate change. Because also workers know there is no work on a dead planet. So we have to do something immediately. And the last sentence, probably, if it comes to the climate agreement from Paris, it has been the international trade union movement who has fought that in the preamble we have a strong reference to just transition. What does it mean, just transition? That people will, in this process of change, by the end have not bad jobs, that they have decent jobs. This is our common goal and our common target.
Okay, I mean, that's a very modern picture of unions here in Germany. And I mean, if we go to Great Britain, people often say here, well, Germany has a healthy manufacturing base compared to Great Britain, and the decrease in collective bargaining in Great Britain. Annelies Stodds, you're a member of the Labour Party, shadow Treasury Secretary for the party. What can you talk about structural change and how that perhaps has led to Brexit?
I mean, I think that we've seen a number of negative developments, I would argue, in the UK economy, particularly over the last 10 years. So it took us much longer to recover from the financial crisis than many other countries. So we've had 8 years of stagnating wage growth that's only just ticked up over the last year, actually. So that recovery in living conditions that happened in many other countries is only just really happening now in the UK. But we've also seen a real regional polarisation occur as well between the north and south of the UK. And it has been correlated, interestingly, with the extent to which different regions have been affected by trade competition. So actually, the strongest predictor of those areas which voted strongly for Brexit wasn't education level, although that was a very, very strong predictor. It was actually whether somebody was living in an area where many jobs had gone due to the impact of trade. I suppose you could call it globalization, but of course that term is so contested we hardly know what it means anymore. In terms of how that led to the Brexit result more generally, obviously there was a grievance there, because when people see that their living conditions aren't improving and they anticipate their children's will be worse than their own were, they want to have politicians listen to them. And when I was talking to people on the doorstep, the message that came across very clearly in the referendum campaign was that people were really fed up with the status quo. They were fed up with politicians. Often, though, they would say, "Not you, love, but we don't like them generally." So there's that big gap there. And I think, to be honest, there's a lot that certainly the left in the UK still has to learn from that process, but probably, I would say, progressives right across all of Europe, because, I mean, I knew that we were going to lose that referendum because of the discussions that I'd had, but it came as a shock to many other progressive people that I knew. So we need to make sure we don't have that complacency.
And we're talking about change. In fact, you know, it's actually, one thinks about Germany, how the center is still sort of holding here, and it's been an oasis of stability, but actually this country has gone through tremendous change. It's been 30 years since reunification, so they've been through that, but now it seems like in Great Britain and in the United States, there's lots of structural change and people are somewhat facing the abyss. You're dealing with this on a daily basis when it comes to the Brexit debate with your constituents. How do you explain complex issues to them, especially in the face of massive disinformation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important question, and I think quite often politicians in the UK have been standing related to where they're sitting, right? And I represent Oxford East, which has got a lot of highly educated people in it. So I try as much as possible to go around the country and talk to people from other backgrounds about some of these questions. I think, you know, we've learned the hard way that many of the concepts that we use to talk about what we want to achieve as progressives just don't have any resonance with people on the doorstep or in their workplaces. I mean, you know, I think the social chapter is a wonderful thing. I think working rights are really wonderful things. Do people I talk to on the doorstep know exactly what I mean when I use those terms? In the UK, a lot of the time they don't. People did attach meanings that they really cared about to the Leave campaign slogan, which is "Take Back Control." And of course, that could mean so many things. I think, you know, as a socialist, I believe in taking back control, collective control over processes that are increasing inequality and causing discrimination. But sadly, the right, which was the main leader of the Leave campaign, they had a very, very different view of taking back control. But because it was a phrase that encompassed everything, that's why they used it. So we have to learn from that, and I think have that discipline of being clear about the language that we use and always banging on the same drum. Otherwise, people are just not going to hear that message.
Okay, moving westward to Michael Veritz, located in Washington with the Center for American Progress. You've been an observer of center-left politics in the United States. Have they abandoned the middle class, the center-left, and you know, or would you say that actually right now people in Europe should be looking at the United States as the vanguard for politics, progressive politics?
Well, ask me in a year and a half, and I tell you whether you should have looked to the United States. But I would say, to a degree, not the center-left has abandoned the middle class, but parts of the middle class have abandoned the democratic consensus. Because we still struggle with the notion that Donald Trump virtually came out of nowhere. And I think as progressives, we need a short-term strategy, and most of that has been spelled out here on the panel and during the day. But we also need to do some deep thinking on how this came about, specifically in the United States with its democratic and libertarian traditions, but also in Europe. And if you look at the people that supported the president, especially the white voters, his supporters are overwhelmingly white. They are socioeconomically, it's an interesting setup. About 1/3 of Donald Trump voters make less than $54,000 a year, which is the median income in the United States. So they're working class. Another third, roughly speaking, make anywhere between $54,000 and $100,000, depending on where you live. You're in the middle classes. And another third makes over $100,000. So we have been in our analysis for a long time, and rightly so, this is where the next election is going to be won, focused on the lower third of the voter migration from Barack Obama towards Donald Trump, of lower income whites, especially in the Midwestern states. But numerically, these are maybe 12, 13, 14 million people. President Trump got 62.9 million votes, and I'm very concerned about the other 45 million. Because they are Americans that are solidly middle class. And if you look at the distinguishing factor, the single most defining factor of these people voting for Donald Trump is authoritarianism. And that's fascinating that you have educated middle-class Americans living in the suburbs, sending their children to public schools that are in good shape, having 2 cars and doing 2 vacations a year, thinking of themselves as decent American law-abiding citizens, voting for this president and continuing to support him. And if you look at what motivated these people, the fascinating thing is that Donald Trump created this Bermuda Triangle of fear between globalization, embodied in trade, terrorism, embodied in Islam and Muslims, and migratory movements embodied in Mexico and Mexicans. The problem for us is when the president talks about Mexico and Mexicans, he talks about a lot of people, but neither about Mexico nor about Mexicans. But this strategy of fear-mongering has triggered authoritarian impulses in people that themselves did not know that they had them. And this has been hardened because of the constant onslaught of racist arguments, fear-mongering, and that's very, very difficult to reverse. And so I think for us, one of the tasks is to implement all the social policies and be convincing to working-class voters that we lost. At the same time, we have to think about these middle classes that willy-nilly give away democratic standards, subscribe to a president who now among Republican party members has a 90% approval rating, and still think that they find themselves within the bounds of the American Constitution and democratic traditions.
And you mentioned migration, immigration as being a hot button issue in the United States. It always has been, but obviously there's lots of fear wrapped around this topic. How do you win voters back? How do you provide context?
Look, this is very, very difficult, and there are people like Will Marshall here that know about this a lot better than I do. So right now you have a lot of progressives making sure that we cannot be accused of open border progressives that basically open up the borders and then you have people from all over the world coming to the United States. At the same time, we have 1 million immigrants a year. They're contributing economically to the United States. If you look at the Latino population in 2050 will be 31 years of age on average. That's a demographic bonus because they resupply our workforce because they're going to pay for my pension. While here in Germany, you'll be in a different situation because in 2050, average German age is going to be close to 51 years. Means half the population is older than 51. Explain to me how you maintain a social system in healthcare with doing that. So I think the arguments are on our side, but the problem is because Republicans talk about migration and don't talk about migration, but they talk about fear and anxieties, this is extremely difficult to frame. And I think we have to walk a thin line, but at the same time sticking to our principles and saying the United States is not only a country of immigrants, we also have a majority among people that are younger than 18 years in the United States that are non-white. We are going to be the first non-majority society by the end of the 2030s. The United States, what it always was, a big sociological field experiment, and I think people need emotional reassurance. There is as much material as immaterial reassurance that people need, that we as a society can live together. And I think we're sometimes underestimating that. Obviously, for me here sitting on this chair, this is a lot easier said than done in Iowa, Ohio, New Hampshire, or Florida if you confront voters that are fearful.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Germany before I turn to the audience for questions, because Michael mentioned, I mean, the good times are happening right now in Germany. I mean, if you think about it, life is quite good, quite prosperous, and Angela Merkel didn't really need to be emotional over the past few years. I mean, when you talk to voters and when you think about labor unions, Rainer, what are you thinking about? What keeps you up at night about what's made upon Germany in the next couple of years?
Yes, certainly we have a quite robust labor market since a couple of years, the highest employment rate ever since reunification. But we have also to acknowledge that we have in Germany the highest low-wage sector in Europe. That more than 7 million workers earning less than 12 euros an hour. So we have a segmented labor market. This is one of the challenges we are facing. The second one is that we have been quite attentive as we learned that trade union members are voting slightly over the average in favor for the AfD. This was for us, to some extent, quite shocking. We went through it into more depth. And what I said earlier, people, even if they have decent jobs, if they have a decent income, they feel more and more uncertain. They individually believing that they lost control on what's going on with digitalization. They lost control what's going on with globalization. And they fear that the future for the children could be much more insecure than their own life. And at the same time, then we conducted a study which discovered that in companies where workers are sheltered by strong workers' representation, by collective agreement, the support for the AfD is below the average. That means quite clearly that people need some sort of safety net. They are aware that we are undergoing an in-depth process of transition, and we can't stop it. But the question is, what are our visions to shape this process, to give people really a perspective that climate change is not a risk for their job, that it can be opportunities, that digitalization is not only a risk, that we can shape those processes. And that means that we have to be much more attentive also to listen to our members, to listen to workers at the planet level, in regional levels. Because there is a high degree on mistrust against political parties, but also to some extent against trade unions. Because we are part of the system, and how we can get back trust of people that we have a vision that they can participate in it, and that in the undergoing process of change that they have a social net where they will not lose jobs, they will not lose their wealth, and their children will have a future. So we have to be much more attentive, and we have to much more, I would say, much more frank also in discussing alternatives and giving people really a perspective, really visions.
Robert, I'm going to give you the last word on this. The Green Party is known as the environmental party, but many of the major parties have co-opted this platform. Is it enough to be just the party for the environment? What's your message today to voters?
Well, obviously not, because if you're only focusing on one issue, you would can't adopt to this change in society. And Michael just said it's material and immaterial issues, and I think that's right. And Rainer mentioned the way wages went down in some parts of the society. I think the lesser third lost netto wages in the last 15 years. So if you compare it to the price rising, you've got lesser than you have today. Than you had 15 years ago. Of course, the welfare level is rising, but you've got, compared to others, you have lesser. So we have this unfairness in society, and we have to get rid of that. I think this is clear. And this is the easier part for politicians, because there you can fix the things in a material way. You can raise taxes and you have higher minimum wages and so on. This is used terrain. We know what we can do. We have to do it, of course, but it's not so hard to find answers. Maybe there we can take back control and argue for more fairness in the system. The other part is much more harder, the immaterial part. I've been to a small town in Saxony. It's called Glashütte. It's near to the Czech border. It's a very old, traditional watchmaker. Is it the right word? Watches were made, and high-end quality watches. So the people there have very good wages, the same as in Munich, where the other watchmaking town is, so that they're not going to Munich. They have to be paid very, very well. Unemployment, zero unemployment, very good wages. AFD, 45%. So it has nothing to do with being poor, being not part of the material fairness system. It must have some immaterial ground. And when you talk to the people, and the city is beautiful. If we have cities in West Germany, in the formerly Ruhrpott, Duisburg or Essen or Oberhausen, the grass is growing between the pavements and so on. In Glashütte, you can eat from the street. It's so beautiful there. And still they are unsatisfied, and they really don't believe that, the same as Michael has said, that politics can change or watch out what is happening. They don't believe in the system. They're anti-democratic, and you can't really grab it. And this immaterial point of politics, I think, is not really addressed in politics because it's so hard to address. And it has much more to do with self-respect, recognition. And what we have learned, I think what we're trying to learn, is that when you are arguing from a defensive perspective, that when you always say it's not right to vote the AfD, it's not right to follow the right-wing populism, then you're always in the defensive. So somehow you must get rid of that to tell an immaterial story of going forward and being part of it and changing things to the better of your generation and the next generation. And because this is an immaterial point, we're talking about storytelling, framing, speech, and being trusted. And this is, of course, hard. You can't find it in the economical books. How can you trust? How you can gain trust? This is a field experiment, and I think the Democrats in the US, they are trying to learn this field experiment.
Okay, I have about 10 minutes for questions. Please raise your hand. Quickly identify yourself. It would be great if you can formulate a question, and I'll take 2 at a time. You, sir, right here.
Hi there. Richard Walker from Deutsche Welle. I would just like to pick up on what Robert Habeck was saying there, because I think the sort of the immaterial, the sort of big idea is something that I was wondering if I would hear it today during today's sessions, a sort of a big emotional idea on the level of Annelies Dodds just said earlier, take back control or make America great again. These are such sort of simple emotional messages about either collective or personal empowerment that I haven't heard it. Is there a progressive, simple, emotional message that has that kind of level?
Hold that thought, gentleman over there.
From the United States. One of the reasons people lost trust in politicians was because since 2008 financial collapse. Oh, thank you. Harley Schlanger from the U.S. One of the reasons people lost faith in politicians and politics is after the 2008 crash, banks were bailed out, speculators were protected, and people lost houses, people lost jobs, and still haven't made it back. I'm sad that Tim Ryan isn't here because he's a supporter of a very important policy, restoring Glass-Steagall in the United States, banking separation. With the problems here with Deutsche Bank and the speculation still limiting what the EU can do, and the ECB continues to defend the bankers, shouldn't the progressive movement come out for something like banking separation and a Glass-Steagall type system so that credit could go to the small and medium enterprises and the job creation?
Okay, any other, I could take one more. Any women that would like to ask a question? Right there, please.
Hi, thank you. I'm Stephanie from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Sorry. So my question is basically, when we talk about it, and I think the speaker earlier addressed this, talking about regressive taxes. So when we talk about basically raising the price of flights, raising the prices of meat, which has to happen, raising the price of wine that is imported from Chile or Australia. So how do we not punish the least fortunate among us, the working class, because it's going to feel, we're going to lose votes, it's going to feel like we're punishing them. So how do we bring them along, but still doing something, passing laws against anything that relates to climate change? Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
Terrific. So maybe we could bundle the economic questions. I don't know who'd like to take that, but the emotional ideas. Annalise, you talked a little bit about, winning it back, and I heard earlier today about how the Republicans are so good at sort of staking their ground and being emotional, maybe negative right now, but how do you turn the table so that progressive politics offer depth, but also appeal and emotion?
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue that I've been thinking about quite a lot this week, actually, because as many other countries have experienced, we've had also a lot of mobilization around environmental issues in the UK, and the emotion of fear that people have been able to convey, I think, very successfully, has been resonant, and that's been pushing in a progressive direction, obviously, because I think it is sensitizing even conservative politicians in the UK to start taking this issue much more seriously. And I think that issue about people's concern about the future for socialists and social democrats, I think it's got to shift into offering people security. Now, in the UK, that word has lots of connotations around things other than just what your economic position is. It also has connotations around people's safety and in policing terms, etc. as well. But really, we need to get into that ground too. Because actually, in many of our communities, people are very disturbed at the rise of organised crime and drug use, etc. So I think that value of security is one that we need to talk about. And we do need to talk about community as well, much, much more, and what makes community. And to be honest, in the UK, community, in many cases, has been impacted on incredibly negatively by austerity, right? The two sides of the same coin. When you don't have public spaces that people can use, when you don't have community centres, when you don't have children's centres, people don't mix, and they don't realise that the community is for all of them. So I think those two values about security and community are ones that we need to start talking about much more and start thinking through.
Michael, do you want to add a little bit to the emotional ideas?
Right. I think this goes back to the issue of immaterial questions. Let me give you one example. I spoke to a Trump voter who came from Detroit a while ago, who used to work in the car industry, got laid off, and was now working for one of these big Amazon distribution centers. And he said, well, good job, a lot more money, safer, my hands are not dirty, I'm running all these fancy robots and moving boxes all day. And I said, why the hell did you vote for Donald Trump? And he looks at me and says, hey man, I used to build cars, now I'm moving boxes. And I must say, I didn't have an answer. This is difficult. And this is also why I think, of course, conservatives are better, at least in the United States, it's a little different here, in fear-mongering, right? To basically say, make America great is not a problem. If you say, make America great again, the devil is in the again, because it basically means turning the wheel of history back to 1957 towards race segregation and insinuating some people of some color are better than others. And so I think the last time there was a unifying message was under Obama, which was not a really defined message of change, but this worked because of who he was, where he came from, and the fact that we were desperately trying to send George W. Bush into retirement. But it, as a slogan and as an idea, I thought the stronger together of Hillary Clinton, as bad as it sounded, was the right idea. You have to reassure people that there is a common future, even with less prosperity, with less wealth, and with less consumption of natural resources, because every idiot knows that we can't go on another 30 years like this. But that's again, this is very, very difficult, and I'm glad that I'm not the politician who has to talk to people in Glashütte, because I know how difficult this is. But if we don't address this monumental change, and if we don't win this without resorting to fear-mongering on the left or to forms of populism that structurally are equally damaging to the fabric of our society, we're not going to be able to swing this.
Okay, maybe you gentlemen can take care of the economic questions. Why does it seem that the upper echelons of society don't get whacked by taxes or high prices when the government changes policy? And is there a reckoning still with the banking industry that needs to be done after the 2008 financial crisis?
Why it was so, it's hard to answer, but it's clear it was a political decision. And we, I think what the guy from the Deutsche Welle asked, how can you, well, sorry, what was your name? Sorry, I didn't got it. Part of the answer is that you have to prove that you are able to fight with the big lobbies. If you want to gain trust in the ones who don't trust the political system anymore, you have to show some balls. Sorry to say. Yeah. So if you're talking about fairness, sometimes you have to prove that Amazon is paying taxes. And it's not Amazon paying taxes. You can't go to people in normal jobs and say, I want to raise the taxes for you. And if you can't bring, but let's say, VW to Volkswagen to building electricity cars, how can you talk to people that they should use Deutsche Bundesbahn or electricity cars? So you have to show somehow braveness to fight against the ones in the big structures. So this is not only necessary because they have the biggest lobbies, but it's necessary to show that you really care for the things you are saying. And then maybe the people are listening that you are really trying to help them, or you want to build up this new this left-wing progressive patriotism somehow. But if you are just talking, then it's just words.
Rainer, what do you think?
No, I would stress a point that we should reflect that we should become probably much more outspoken, much more radical, especially with economic policies over the last 2-3 decades. We are all pretty much aware that austerity, neoliberalism has led us into this situation where we are. So this is not an answer. What are our answers to talk about good societies, to give a positive vision? And I think we are much too shy to address points which are really critical. If it comes, for example, to a more fair taxation system. We don't like to take money away from the workers to pay more taxes. No, but we have to talk about redistribution, because globalization is creating wealth in significant numbers. But this wealth is more and more unequal distributed. So this is a point which people really can understand, and they fear that something is going wrong in societies. And the progressive forces, I think, have to be more outspoken, to talk about decent life, to talk about affordable housing, to talk about the city, the municipality we like to live in, with functioning public services, with public transport sectors, and so on and so forth, because we have a lot of responses, a lot of answers. But I think we are much too shy, not outspoken, sometimes not radical enough.
Okay, I hope that answered it for the Deutsche Welle guy, but I'd like to thank the panel. And I'm sorry I couldn't get to more questions, but I was told we need to end on time because you need that 15-minute break to grab something to drink in this hot room. Let's give the panel a round of applause. And be back here by 7 o'clock. Thank you.
Du musst los?
Nee, ich bleib bis
Ach so,
zum Beginn und
ach so.
muss dann danach sozusagen kurz
Ach so.
vor Ende muss ich
Ja.
zu Michael Schwarz
Ja,
meine
also echt tolle Geschichten erzählen. Echt interessant.
Ich bin ein Rheinländer, wir erzählen ja eine Geschichte.
Oder so ein halber Ami. Also die können das ja auch gut, ne? Hast du ja abgeguckt, ja.
Nee, mein großes Idol ist Hans-Dieter Risch.
Wer ist das?
Der ist ein rheinischer Kabarettist, leider verstorben ist. Der hat so improvisierte Geschichten aus Rheinland erzählt. Super. Ja, ich bin jetzt 2 Wochen nochmal hier. Vielleicht machen wir dann nochmal eine Strategierunde. Sagt ihr mir, was ihr braucht. Okay, super.
Und nochmal perfekt.
Hi. Hi. Petra. I will be moderating you. Okay. Nice meeting you.
Ja, ja. Nimmst du denn alles fit? Ja, kommt noch, drängen noch welche rein. Ah, okay, komm, dann warten wir noch 2 Minuten. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's proceed with the next part of our program. Please take your seat. Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to announce tonight's keynote speech and the keynote speaker. I've introduced him already. His name is Stephan Weil, and to our international audience, he's the prime minister of a big state in the middle of Germany. And I said earlier that we had successful politicians here today. And Stephan Weil is someone we can learn something from, I believe. Just to give you an impression, in 2013, he won his first election in the state of Lower Saxony against a conservative incumbent, which is, as we know, an effort in itself to fight an incumbent. And then 4 years later, when his re-election came about, he was in a very difficult position because 3 weeks earlier, the SPD, his party, the Social Democrats, were defeated in the federal elections very badly. But he not only managed to win the election, I looked it up again, he actually added 4.3 percentage points to the result in 2013, which really in this situation was a tremendous and hopeful occasion for all of us. So what is his secret? I think it is the combination of a down-to-earth image. So he, in interviews sometimes considers himself as being just a simple beer-drinking prime minister. And at the same time, a modern image, a modern approach to politics in economic and social terms. And as you well know, one of the biggest automobile companies in Germany is in Lower Saxony, which is Volkswagen. Yeah, and now he is going to tell us his thoughts on how we as progressives should deal with people left behind by economic change. And I think there are just few people in Germany that are more destined to have thoughts on this. So, Stephan, please enter the stage. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Hello, everybody, or as we say in the northern part of Germany, moin miteinander. Thank you very much for your invitation and for the very friendly introduction. Let me first introduce my state, Lower Saxony, a little bit to you. We are a state with 8 million people, so we are number 4 of 16 states in the Federal Republic. We are number 2 of landscape. We are number 1 of agriculture, car industry, and that's a new number 1 of renewable energies. So also with a clear perspective for the next years to come. So thank you very much for having the opportunity to reflect together with all of you how we can regain an offensive of the democratic left in a period of fundamental changes and increasing tensions. Today we are talking about a restart in Europe and about transatlantic alliances for a progressive policy in the face of a variety of challenges. Needless to say, the US are not Europe. Different political systems. Let's take only the right to vote. And a different, very different political culture distinguish Europe and America, the Federal Republic of Germany, and the United States, and Delaware and Niedersachsen from each other. Nevertheless, we are confronted with similar difficulties. Our open democracies are very hard under pressure. A considerable number of people turn away disappointed from the state or politics. Either do not vote at all anymore or choose political show-offs. It is absolutely necessary to think about how we can inspire those people again who feel homeless and unheard. So what is to be done? The most famous sticky note in recent history hung in the campaign headquarters of the Democratic campaign for the 1994 presidential elections and read, "It's economy stupid." Where and under what conditions do people work? What about their social security? This is still the decisive question. That must be the central point of all our thoughts. And to concrete this point, we are in a time of fundamental changes and the vast majority of people feel this very clearly. So what's then the task of left-wing politics? More than 1.5 decades ago, the SPD in Germany conducted an election campaign in Germany with the slogan, "Security in change." For me, these 3 words, security and change, put out our tasks of today in a nutshell. If we succeed in demonstrating competently and credibly how, despite globalization and digitization, despite individualization and over-economization, work and social security are secured and recreated, we will be able to regain a great deal of trust. I'm convinced of this because that is, from my experiences, is at the heart of the majority of the population. The economic side is indeed of paramount importance. New technologies are changing revolutionary the world of labor. These days, additionally, we are facing the challenge of balancing economy and ecology. And last but not least, the contrast between capital and labor has by no means disappeared. It must always be the policy of the democratic left to stand up for good work that is fairly paid and social secured. There should be no doubt about that at all. In the end, social policy is also practiced because those who eliminate economic inequalities pursue a real policy of prevention. After all, social problems such as poverty, crime, violence are often closely linked to economic precariousness. In addition to this economic significance, however, there's also a social significance that cannot be neglected, especially in times of polarized societies. Work is a place of meeting and exchange. It is a place of encounter where something is accomplished collectively. You do something together with your colleagues. It gives meaning. Making oneself useful is one of the most frequently mentioned answers given by the employees to the question of what motivates them every day in their work. Employees experience a sense of belonging in their job, and that should, especially by left politicians, never be underestimated. Continuity in the local workplace, the community and the cycle of colleagues, identification with the employee, in short, rooting through work, all these are important soft factors, especially in uncertain times. Also for solidarity and for the cohesion of our society. For many people, work is a piece of home. I'm convinced we have underestimated this and instead set priorities on flexibility and market options, especially under the flag of neoliberalism. Changes in the world of work to always involve fundamental mechanisms of social coexistence. Therefore, we cannot simply wait and see. Rather, we must actively advocate that, for example, changes in employment biographics are not stigmatized as failure. New orientations must be possible without leading to a complete crash. This is a real problem in Germany. Education and qualification are long life periods, and we have to establish this as a real important task of left politics. The internal climate in companies and institutions must also become more democratic. Those who want satisfied employees need to make them participate. When employees are valued, companies receive important impulses. This, however, requires companies to drive these processes forward. To sum it up, if these aspects are taken into account, technical developments should be less as a threat than seen as an opportunity. And this is a challenge for left politicians. There is no shortage of tasks. Digitization and artificial intelligence will turn the world of work upside down. Climate protection and decarbonization will force industry to restructure. In Lower Saxony, as I said, a focal point of the automotive industry, we know exactly what enormous efforts are involved. It's not just about industry and cars. It is about the future of thousands of jobs. That's why we have to combine labor and climate protection together. The clearer and the better we succeed in creating work and social security under these conditions, the more successful we will be. So, dear friends, it is not just about the political content. It is also about the form of politics. It's a very important point for me. The international success of populism is also the result of a tough elite critique. many people have less and less confidence in the political, economic, and intellectual leadership of their state. This criticism is traditionally a privilege of the political left, of ours. Unfortunately, however, parts of the population understand the political left now as part of the establishment, which they criticize and regard as distanced, far removed, and untrustworthy. Those people are often the so-called people who work hard and play by the rules, to quote one last time an American politician, Bill Clinton. According to its own self-image, the democratic left works specially for the interests exactly of these people. And it makes it all the more painful to note a distance that can hardly be denied. The causes may lie less in the content of politics than in the appearance of politics. Let us take this evening as an example. Sorry to say this now. We are sitting in a cool, not so cool, in a little bit hot conference venue, but in a cool style, in Berlin Mitte. We are primarily cosmopolitan academics and probably hold more or less the same views. The unheard people we are talking about are certainly not here. In political reality, this is perhaps not even the exception, but the rule. This leads to politicians mostly being perceived only through the media as relatively elevated beings who no longer have much to do with the normal people's everyday lives. So politicians, that's my experience from many meetings, sometimes seem to be like aliens from a very other system. In such a situation, in connection with the uncertainties described at the beginning, a gap arises. It is not a harmless gap. Populists can use it for their criticism of the elites, but also as a base for their simple as well as false answers. How can this, I feel very clearly, unsatisfactory situation be changed? This is a challenging task, and there is not one big formula. In my personal experience, however, it helps a lot to use every opportunity to leave one's own bubble. In other words, going to the citizens instead of making statements, listening instead of talking first and foremost, to discuss instead of delivering speeches. Especially left politicians has to be close to the people, I'm convinced. Citizens' meetings, town hall meetings, for example, are much more satisfying than the, from Germany, traditional political events with speeches and panel discussions. That applies to the visitors of such discussions, and that regularly applies to me because I learn permanently at those meetings. And perhaps something else needs to be taken to heart. Really, many of these critical citizens I'm talking about completely wrong with their suspicion that their own achievements are not sufficiently respected? Those who transfer shares from A to B at the push of a button and make a lot of money with it may not work as hard, for example, as a nurse working shifts. This is what we have to point out, and these are the people we need to focus on. Getting them in a better position is the first step to regain trust. Dear friends, one final comment. We must talk about political content. We must also talk about political culture. But what is the political purpose? Many of the fundamental changes in our time described at the beginning also bring back great benefits, and I will not belittle that. But all of them amount to subjecting our lives to the needs of economic rationality and to advancing individualization. This is not the human image that the political left has always represented. This has always been a matter of forming communities, representing common interests, and above all, keeping them together. Traditionally, the concept of solidarity has always stood for this. Today, we may more modern speak of cohesion. In German, I often use the word Zusammenhalt, but the content remains essentially the same. This content corresponds to a basic human need. To stand up for this value is just as important today and meets the needs of most people just as it has always done. Cohesion, by the way, is also the sharpest contrast to the doctrines of populism, which is completely intended to divide society and to exclude a part of their members. Cohesion and solidarity are the best alternative to all the perils of the political right. To summarize that all, I'm convinced that the best advice we can give ourselves is to defend this fundamental idea of cohesion in word and deed every day and all over the world. This might be the best fundament for a comeback of progressive politics. Thank you very much for your attention.
Vielen herzlichen Dank. Many thanks for this inspiring speech. You can sit down here. And special thanks also for holding up the mirror to the progressive community in a little bit. And I will now hand over to the chair of the last panel of this day, Petra Prinzler from the German weekly Die Zeit. She will introduce the other panelists, and I wish you all an inspiring debate. Thank you.
So, welcome to the really final panel, the crescendo of today. I know you all deserve a glass of wine or a glass of beer that we'll probably have for you, Mr. Weil. And sorry for not having a town hall meeting now, but I'm sure that the Progressive Center will work on that, so to satisfy your needs. We're still waiting for the governor. There he is. Gunnar, we are great to have you here. And I would like right away to have your input and your reflections on what we just heard. Basically, the Prime Minister of Lower Saxony said, Clinton is right, it's about the economy, stupid. And then comes a couple of other points. But is it about the economy when liberals want to win a state?
I thought that speech was fantastic.
Okay, she can cut it off here and we can go
seriously, I mean, and I think I think we have 20 candidates for president now. You might enter, and that you'll find the others copying. But I mean, even today, Joe.
Please let me stay in Hanover.
You stay, okay. But you know, even today, Joe Biden, who announced his candidacy for president, I mean, what he said is that we really have a battle for the soul of America, and that America is an idea, and the idea that he is fighting for is really the idea that you just articulated. When you talked about work giving hope, that work gives meaning. You know, there's a big conversation now in the States about the quote, the dignity of work. You talked about the unheard, you know, not being in this room. And unfortunately, so many of the unheard feel totally, they have lost trust. And they've lost trust for many reasons. The system is not working for them. And they feel that the people with the money who make the campaign contributions historically get to call the shots. So I think you did a fantastic job of identifying the nature of the challenge and really laying down the gauntlet to progressives around the world that if we want to win again, to win more, we need to make sure that we keep the focus where the people are and to be understanding where they're coming from.
one of the tweets that I read from you was that Democrats need to understand the elections will be won in places like Lordstown. So it's not just about the people, it's also about places. What does that mean? What's Lordstown?
Lordstown is a town in Ohio that used to be big in the steel. That part of the country, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, these were the states that got a lot of publicity in the last election, because particularly Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan were places that had traditionally been going to the Democrats running for president. But Donald Trump got those people. And it came as a big shock, but I think, looking back, maybe it shouldn't have. But these are folks, and I think the very title of this talk was, how do we stand up for the people in places that are being left behind? This is such a massive challenge, because not everybody, we spend a lot of time thinking about how are we going to retrain people. And so a lot of people, the digital is becoming so big, but not every coal miner, not every steel worker can become a software coder. Not everybody can be retrained to be a phlebotomist, the person who takes blood. And this is much of the retraining that is taking place. And so I think we have to do a much better job, not only of preparing the younger people for a different future. That's frankly a much easier path. But to figure out how we work, with those who have been displaced and dispossessed from work that probably generations in their family have done.
There's sometimes a certain suspicion that this means that you will go back to the male, white, working man.
Well, this is, and if you look about why Trump won, he said, we're going to make America great again. This was his theme. This is what all of those hats say, the Make America Great Again hats. And so he is trying to put in the minds of the people that by being president, he will bring those jobs back for them. And what we have to do, I think, as Democrats in the states, as progressives everywhere, is prepare all of our people, no matter where they're born, no matter their socioeconomic, their race, anything, to prepare them for a very different world. And that is the project. That is the challenge. I think there are some very good ideas, some really important work being done in our country and in other countries as well. I'm optimistic. I really do believe that in 2020 we're going to elect a Democrat again, and I think it's going to be a very, very different conversation a couple of years from now. And frankly, some of us, we came this time not only to learn from you, but we came because we are so upset about what Donald Trump has done to destroy the transatlantic relationships. And we wanted all of you to know from us personally that we're determined for a much better and different future.
Mr. Weil, maybe I can briefly come back to you, because within the German social democracy, there is also the suspicion that when you talk about work and talk about bringing, that when you reflect on what you just heard, that basically you think also about the male working class, and that you forget the women, you forget the migrants. So how can you frame progressive politics, go back to the places that you left behind, go back to the people that feel excluded, that are the steel workers, that are the car workers in the US, and not at the same time having excluded the new other people that might vote for you as well? So how do you do that?
So first of all, I was not only speaking about men and not about German men. I'm far distance from that. I feel that the thought of cohesion and solidarity means all of the members of the society, independently whether they are born in Germany or not, independently there are man or female, whatever. And there are some special points in the German discussion. We have to bring again more value to very important jobs. For example, nursing in Germany mostly is a female job, and it's underpaid. And that's why we are really in trouble because of, for example, the care for elderly people in Germany. And I feel some of the main tasks, for example, of social democratic, is to criticize hard a system which is over-economicized, very intensively, and underpaid, especially for those who are working in. And if we are so successful in this discussion, we can demonstrate whom we are talking about, especially in this case for women. But that's not the only, the one point. Another one, all the technical jobs in Germany, for example, that famous German engineers, are mainly men. So our task is to support, especially young women, to go into these jobs, and not only to change the jobs, but also the culture of the companies inside. I'm in the supervisory board of VW, and I know very clearly what I'm talking about. That is I feel it's a chance for social democracy in Germany to demonstrate what the idea of cohesion and solidarity brings and fortune to all the society, and that's what we have to do in the years to come.
Marije, Laffeber, you're the vice president, the deputy. Oh, I wrote it down. I knew that I would make a mistake. Now, I spelled your name correctly, but I didn't get your title right. Help me. The Deputy Secretary of the PS. So you have the overview of all what's going on in Europe. Is there a kind of success model where you would say, yes, it's not just easy to talk about inclusion and cohesion, but it's also working? Being a social democratic party for everybody really means you include everybody? Where would you kind of have us look to?
Yeah, so first of all, I would like to thank you, and also like to thank the Prime Minister, because I think it was a wonderful speech and very inspiring. I come from the neighboring area in the Netherlands, from Groningen, so I'm very proud always to see successful neighbors, because that could help us in the Netherlands as well to turn things around.
Just organize him a town hall meeting, he'll come.
No, is there a successful model? No, I think at the moment not, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
Just those two guys? Nobody else?
No, it's like, no, that's not true. No, we have, of course, some successes, but a successful model, I don't think, is there. And also, I think it is important. We, as a Party of European Socialists, we work in 28 different EU member states. And what I try to always explain is that we have 28 different cultures, 28 different histories. So what is really an important difference between us and, for example, conservatives, is that at least we have some common values we share. So we have a program, we have our core principles we try to defend, but it is the truth that there is a different history, for example, in a country like Greece, where until relatively recent there has been a dictatorship, or Finland, or Germany, or let's say Hungary, or the Netherlands. We all have a different history and a different, let's say, background. However, we try to share the common thing we have, and that's our values. How this is playing out, I think many of the things have been said already about the crisis in the progressive movement. There are some very good examples, and I can be very proud of it. For example, Antonio Costa in Portugal is doing very, very well. I think the secret of his success is that Portugal came out of a situation where there was the economic financial crisis, and they were really pushed to do a lot of austerity measures, so to cut basically on everything we as progressive think is important. So to cut a little bit on healthcare, to cut a little bit on education, to cut a little bit on childcare, to cut on the pensions, to cut on social housing. And these are things I think are totally wrong. So when Antonio Costa came to power, he said, I'm going to do things differently. And first of all, I want to abolish this agenda of austerity only, because he believed sincerely that the power of a strong economy was more in investment. We have to invest in education. Why? Because we need people to be educated in order to find good jobs. And when they have the good jobs, they pay taxes. And these taxes they pay for better education. So it's like a vision for the future. And I think he did quite well. So then we have another success story is in Spain. And there we can see a new prime minister, Pedro Sanchez, who became, in a way, coincidentally a prime minister, is now running a campaign, and hopefully by the end of this month will be elected to continue doing his job. But he very much invested in the equality agenda. So to invest in gender equality. And one of the things he has done is to have a majority of women in his government, but also not just to have women in the traditional, let's say, weak and soft portfolios, but to make a clear decision that women shall lead in economical and financial, so let's say the hard stuff, portfolios, which I think they're doing quite well. And so he's now leading the polls, and I think it can be successful. We see in the north, we hope to have a new wave of optimism and strength coming from Scandinavia. So we have recently done a good election result in Sweden. We're leading the government again with Stephan Löfven. But also we just, a couple of days ago actually, by slight majority, slight difference of votes, but it doesn't matter, in the end, won the elections in Finland. So another prime minister could come, leading a government and promoting progressive policies.
It's very interesting that you started your speech by saying there's no good example, and then you kind of continued on and on and on.
No, it's like, unfortunately, I come from the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is like a laboratory of all kinds of experiments. And in our country, society and politics are very fragmented. We are not the only country, and you know we can brag about the successes, but I think we have to be realistic. That's another problem for Dutch. We are quite pragmatic. Look at the situation in France, look at the situation in Ireland, look at the situation in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Austria. It could be much better. It is not the case. So there we definitely have to analyze what is going on, and I think we have to really look into the mirror, because to be honest, talking about progressives and social democrats, we are of course a progressive party, and we've been around the block for a large number of years. We have claimed many successes, and I think we have contributed to let's say, a strong welfare state, to decent jobs, all these education, have access for everybody. It's like we have really increased life standards for people in Europe. However, now I think it's come to a point that we have to renew seriously, because in some countries, like the ones I mentioned, the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Germany, in France, there is the rise also of the green parties, for a good reason.
Before we go there, before you go there, let me include our colleague from Hungary. The reason why I want to get you into the debate right at this point is that you can very exactly tell us what went wrong in Hungary. When we had first a small talk before this debate, you basically said, look, in Hungary the populists have overtaken our society, not just the state, but the economy and the whole society. So we are far ahead of what can happen to other countries. Can you pinpoint us to one or two things that you did wrong, that the other countries, parties, whoever should not do?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question.
Sorry. I know.
First of all, I became an MP after 2010, so
it's not you personally, okay.
I don't know how to govern because I wasn't there. But yes, the first step is a failure of a progressive government. This is the first step. And I just wanted to warn everybody who's still in government somehow, locally or on the state level, that once you let a populist to the government, and what we saw in the last 10 years, there is no going back. So you have to know that Viktor Orbán won his first election in 2010 with a 2/3 majority with the good old electoral system. That's another question, that the first thing he changed, just the constitution, the media law, and the electoral system. And since then, for example, last spring, Fidesz got 2.5 million votes. The opposition got also 2.5 million votes, and they still have 2/3 majority in the parliament, and the whole opposition got less than 1/3 seats in the parliament. But the biggest problem is that after 2010, they started to restructure the whole country systematically. It's nothing about good economy, it's nothing about good governance. The only goal is to ensure their power forever. This is the only thing they see. Whether it's serving this goal is good, what is not serving this goal is, should be demolished. And, you know, it works. So today, the thing we say state capture, it's already done, I think in the last circle. So the Constitutional Court is not a Constitutional Court which is something part of checks and balances. They are proudly say that they are for serving the government. The National Bank is for serving the goals of government. And it's all the same for to the local government office, to the Secret Service, to the police, everything. So the system started to work. On the other hand, which I want to warn everybody in Europe and the United States also, because I think you have a really tough populace there, is media. And just look at how Trump started to fight against free media. Just today news, international institution just observed Hungarian media. Today news, 80% of the current Hungarian media, television, radio stations, everything, newspapers, 80%, more than 80% is directly owned and governed by Fidesz or the government. And it's not like you have a rightist media, you have direct propaganda, which means that the government is good and the opposition and the civic society are bad. These are the news. And you should know that the people on the countryside today only get these news. And one last just number to understand what, not understand, you cannot understand, you have to come there and try it. I always say that when I'm talking about the Western European audience these days, I feel like myself I'm coming from the Jurassic Park or a zoo. I'm answering you, I'm feeling the same. Living in this country as an opposition politician. But in the first 3 months, the Hungarian government, not Fidesz the party, the Hungarian government from budget money spent 50 million euros for billboards and paid ads. The whole opposition got 1 million euro for the whole EU elections. The right is, the left is, everybody who runs in the election. So the government and the governmental party spent 50 times more money before the campaign that we all together have for the campaign. And you can ask what we are waiting in May 26. I can tell you we will not change the world in this election, but of course we have some tools, and one tool is to go back personally to the people, because this is what we can do now.
When we stick for a second with the failures of progressive movements, would you say one of the failures was, we heard these words like emotions, feelings, appearance in the panel that we listened to before. Would you say that your party was not good in emotionalizing issues?
It's more difficult what my party did, because it was a coalition government with the liberals.
Okay,
we changed our prime ministers, and we just got the economic crisis at our last year of our governments. So it was like a disaster, it's true. But I think we progressives, leftists, liberals, should decide, honestly, whether we are servants of the globalization or servants of our people. Because we cannot wait to the voters to believe us that we can change their small little life if we don't give the sign of it. And I can tell you, yes, the last time we were governing, we made big cuts to save the country, budget cuts, taking away pensions, taking away fees, everything, and started to make a new taxation on the banks. But to be honest, when Viktor Orbán came, he made 10 times bigger the taxation on banks. And everybody from our progressive side were shouting, oh, these banks will leave Hungary, these international companies will close and go away. Nobody went away. Everybody paid the money. So it's just, when I'm talking about, you have to at least talk, on the other hand, act when you are there as a leftist, if you want to reach our core voters we already left.
I would nevertheless like to stick with the question of the emotions for a second. Stephan Weil, you're not, as far as I know, you're not the very emotional kind of Leonardo DiCaprio whatsoever type. So what about, what about emotions?
Well, I'm a typical man from the northern part of Germany. We are a little bit calm and quiet, you're right. But that's not the problem in communicating with the people. The most important currency of political success is not charisma or something else, or sex appeal, or whatever you want. It is credibility. If people feel you say what you think and you do what you say, and you prove this for a couple of years, you can, I'm absolutely sure, win nearly every election. The hard thing is to prove that over a long line. But if you do so, there is trust. And that's why problems of political culture, from my point of view, are so important. Maybe more important than our discussions about political content. If we are if the people we are talking about feel that left politicians are very intelligent men and are thinking great ideas, but they want to have a drink with them, we can't win. That's the point, and I know that it's difficult to communicate this in a situation, you underline the situation of the media, and it's really a problem, but you can do it also, for example, with social media. For example, not communicating pictures with some very, very important persons, but being in the hospital and talking with the people there, especially with the working people. So I'm a little bit conservative in this question.
So this is where I then have to ask you a nasty follow-up question. When you say it's about credibility and politicians have to do what they have to do, it's a kind of everybody says this. But does this mean that in reverse, the progressives failed the people too often? And this is why there's a lack of trust?
Well, my definition of progressive policy is close to be to people and their interest. For example, I feel in Lower Saxony we have really a challenging situation because we have to rebuild our car industry for being more ecological. And if people really know that you are working for their jobs, and this is the point you are stressing every time, then they follow you. You're also on this way. I have a concrete example. 2 weeks ago, I had a meeting at a very small company in the peripheral region of Lower Saxony, and they all were working for VW, but for a diesel. And the plant, or VW, they're working for, will be now totally electrified. So they know they will lose their job, if there is no chance to get another product for the company. So I discussed with them what we have to do to change the policy of their company. And after the meeting and after the discussion, well, the shop steward said to me that was the only way to come to their heart, not to talk about something which are not real, but to be very close to the reality, working hard with them together, but then also to do that what we are talking about.
Governor, I see you nodding all the time. What's your take?
Well, I think that's right, and my view is, regardless of the content, what our voters and our citizens are looking for are people who understand the challenges that they face, have a perspective and ideas about how to address those challenges, and they also want somebody who's going to fight for them. And I think of, we've had some great presidents in recent years, President Obama, and before him, President Clinton. President Clinton was famous for saying, "I feel your pain." And this was, sometimes people made fun of it, but he really did understand the challenges that people were going through. He also happened to be a total policy wonk. I mean, he understood that means he really understood the issues in detail. And finally, and I think some people, if they look back at his first campaign, the big turnaround, I think, was in New Hampshire, and he said something along the lines of, "I will be with you until the last dog dies." And the way that the people of New Hampshire, the way that the people of the Democratic Party took that, is he was going to fight for them until the very end. And so I do think, and now we have, there's, even in the presidential campaign as it has started, we have some candidates who are laying out in great, great detail what their policies will be, and others who are saying it's really too early for that, we cannot get too much into the detail until people understand the values that we stand for. We'll see in the end who's right.
And who do you think will be right?
I think it does start with values. I think unfortunately, I think Hillary Clinton would have been an excellent president, but I think in her campaign she was very deep into the policy details pretty quickly, and I think you have to tie it into an overarching narrative. Frankly, the kind of narrative that the Prime Minister laid out in his introductory speech. So I think it's a combination. They do have to believe that you're credible. If it's only platitudes, if it's only high-end thinking, that only gets you so far. But if it's only policy details, it does not connect to the actual lives that they are living, that's also not enough. And I think one example of that right now, we have a massive problem in the United States that the Europeans don't have around student debt. And so there are some candidates who are saying, we're going to pay off all of your student debt. And that's going to appeal to some. But there are others, and I think appropriately so, who are trying to take an out-of-the-box perspective. And the way it has always worked traditionally in the United States is when you borrow money to go to college, what you repay is what you repay. It does not depend upon how much money you earn. And so now there are new concepts that are developing. They're called income share agreements. And in this case, what you repay is actually based on the income that you make afterwards. And so it's not a matter of the government just writing a check and just forgiving all of this debt, but it's about thinking differently and a little bit out of the box, helping the people solve their own problems.
You're also positive, so concrete, so to the solutions. In one of the earlier panels, we heard that one of the advantages of the populists is that they can kind of paint a triangle of fear, which is globalization is bad, I will protect you, migration is bad, I will protect you, terror is bad, I will protect you. So how could a progressive triangle or whatsoever look like?
Well, I think they have an easier argument to make because they keep it very simple. It's appealing. People are nervous because of all these changes. And so I think what progressives have to do is convince them, which should be very easy to do, that we understand exactly what we're going through. But we're not going to offer this simple nonsense solution. We're going to work with them to figure it out. And we are going to fight for them every single day. And I really do believe, and I think, in the end, that's going to be a much more winning argument. I mean, if you look at Donald Trump, he has not enlarged his base. There was a poll out just a few days ago. He has tied his all-time low at 39% in terms of support. It's amazing, frankly, to many of us that he still has 39%, but 39% is not enough to win an election. And so the question is, what does the successful Democrat do? And the successful Democrat must not, in my view, simply focus on turning out our base. We have to win an overwhelming number of Democrats, but we also have to win the independents, and we also have to win some disaffected Republicans. And I think this is one of the battles going on right now in our party. There are some, on the far left who are saying, let's just turn out the base, we're not going to worry about the middle, but that is not how you win a general election for the presidency in the United States.
Marije, let's turn once again to Europe. When I kind of cut you off very unpolitely, you were mentioning the green, which meant that I seem to hear that there's a certain doubt that traditional progressive parties, or rather social democratic parties, are not the ones considered to really lead societies into coping with the change that will come through climate change.
Yes, I think we can see that. So it's for me, it's a bit surprising because it's like I think that the green and fighting against climate change is a part of our movement, has always been a part of our movement. But apparently, a lot of people now see it a bit differently. And so talking about the Netherlands and about Belgium, I think it's also coming from something very simple and realistic. So we're coming from the low countries, meaning that we are living below sea level. And 50% of our country, the Netherlands, is below sea level. And that's exactly the part, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Utrecht, which is like the economical center where most people live. So if nothing is changing in the next 12 years, we will have a serious problem, coming first of all from the rivers entering our countries, and second of all from the seaside, where seawater levels are going to rise. And we now have this advertisement in the Netherlands. It's a young girl, around 8, 9 years old, having an inflatable boat, saying to her mama, "Mommy, mommy, the good thing about climate change is that I can maybe go to school in my boat." And you have to laugh, like, oh my God, that's really funny. And then it makes you think, like, no, that's not funny at all. But it could be a realistic scenario if nothing is being done. So I think what people want now is to really have more emphasis on that. And so I admire also Greta, the young girl from Sweden, who didn't go to school, to ask, to have more attention for climate change. We have to take this very serious.
Is it really admiring her? Is it not just a bit of envy? There's just a couple of young kids and they're getting the people out on the streets?
No, I think it is. I admire her. I tell my kids every day, they're 9 and 12, this is fantastic what she is doing. Because apparently there were a lot of elderly people, let's say my generation, I call myself an elderly woman in the eyes of my children, and everybody elder than me, we are not doing enough. Because if we would have done enough, we wouldn't have been where we are today. So I think it is very good that a young girl is asking attention for such a really dramatic problem. And I think she is very courageous. I think it's also wonderful to see that we have a new generation of young people, of teenagers, who really believe in a democratic system. They believe that politicians can make these changes. It's not because they don't believe in democracy. They believe in democracy, they do it in a peaceful way. But it also means that we have to do much more. And until now, apparently, we have not done enough. So that is, I think, one of the reasons why a lot of people are now supporting the Greens. But what I think is important is that we put this much higher on our own agenda as well.
Stephan, well, was it correct that I saw you nodding that you haven't done enough when it comes to fighting climate change and have an idea of a just transition?
We hadn't done enough. It's obviously, look at the figures of Germany. It's down under, wide down under the line we have to reach. But I think there is a, coming back to your discussion, there's a special function of, in Germany, social democrats. The conservatives, in the end, and I hope I'm not offending anybody here in the room, the conservatives don't really take care about environment and climate. The Greens, they do, but, and I hope Robert Habeck won't be angry with me, they don't care about labor and jobs.
Oh, he will be angry.
And no, but it's a matter of fact, I feel. And what is the function of social democrats? To demonstrate how you can combine climate protection and jobs for the future. It's the real, I think that is the masterpiece of social democratic parties in the 21st century. And that is what we have to do in Germany now in the next years very hardly.
Is it an issue in the part of Europe you come from, climate? Would you say this is an issue that you can embrace and win votes with?
It's a serious issue. So, of course, in Hungary there is minimum 2 countries. One is Budapest and the county capitals, the big cities. And the other country is the countryside, which is several things: wages, how you get information, the political culture of the people, the tradition of the people, everything. In the cities, in the big cities, of course, where opposition and leftists and green parties are strong, you should know last springtime the opposition and we just won the election in Budapest in the individual districts also. So we beat Fidesz in Budapest, for example. And for the next generation, of course, it's really important. For a German, it should be strange, but MSP, our Social Democrat Party, we have the only common list running in the EU election with a small Green Party of Hungary, which party's leader should be, I hope, after winning the pre-election, the next joint opposition candidate for the
European Parliament.
No, for Budapest. The mayor of Budapest, yes. So we are together, of course, as we talked about, because naturally, I think, left and green parties are much more closer than left parties, even liberals or everybody else. It's different countries, different parties, I know, but in Hungary we are together with the Greens, and in some way they are much far leftist in some kind of policies than we. So I think it's no problem. I was here in March 15 in Berlin, and I saw with my own eyes when the young German boys and girls, thousands of them, were marching in the streets, and I asked, what is this? And then I realized that this is the same movement. There is no movement like this in Hungary. You should know we are marching for our life, not for, not our children are marching for their future. We are marching for our present these days. And there were big mass demonstrations in Hungary, but it was because the government raises the extra working hours to 400 hours in a bill like this. So, like in the Middle Age, we have problems like this today.
I have a million other questions that I would like to ask you, and I think it's a fascinating debate, but we only have about 10 minutes left, and I was urged to give you the voice and have you ask questions and help me to kind of get this thing to a great crescendo. So whoever wants to ask a question, raise your hand there in the back, and please be brief.
Hello, good evening. My name is Alice and I work at the Forza Research Institute and I'm from Lower Saxony. Therefore, I have a question for Stephan Weil. It's regarding the results of your election in 2017. What is striking about, although you've spoken a lot about the importance of economic values and about the narrative, Lower Saxony is a success story in demobilizing AfD voters. So it's the state, I think, currently with the lowest share of AfD voters and AfD potential, and we have strong states in the rest of Germany as well. But what was, in your analysis, the secret to demobilizing populists?
Will you answer right away? Just for the Americans in the room, the AfD is the populist German party. Would you have a quick response to that one? What did you do? What's your secret?
Well, first of all, we are not a paradise, and we are more votes for the AfD than we wanted to have. But 6.2% below the average of Germany and the other states. I feel there may be some different reasons. One of the most important from my view was the attitude. We were doing our job in autumn 2015 and winter 15-16, when a huge number of migrants came to Germany. And as the only of 16 states in Germany, we not did it only as a task for politicians and a state task. We started a movement with the relevant parts of our society. A committee which is called Niedersachsen packt an, so Lower Saxony tackles. And that means that we said we stand also in this situation for an open society in Lower Saxony. Secondly, we support the volunteers. we needed extremely at that time, but also today. And third, we are working together on concepts for integration. And part of this alliance are all the relevant institutions of our society in Lower Saxony. So all the churches, all the associations of the business people, all the trade unions, sport associations, and whatever you want. So there was a very clear position, and everybody in Lower Saxony could have known where this society and the government and the Prime Minister stands for. And I feel that helps a lot 1 year later to say there is no reason to be unsure in Lower Saxony, and I feel that was the best thing we could have done in this in this crisis. It had been a crisis.
Thanks a lot for that precise answer. Then the back.
Yes, thank you. I'm Martin Perret. I'm working for European Alternatives here based in Berlin. I just have a simple question, or a simple or a complicated one, I don't know. But we talk a lot about credibility, of having credibility, and so it comes with credible policies that actually bring a change to people. And I would like you, it's a question for all of you, sorry, in terms of policies, how do you ensure that the people affected are an integral part of the policy process? And I would like you to be a bit concrete, because also this is what could be a possibility, what could be a plan basically to have the most affected be included in these processes, because they are often excluded from it. Thank you.
Maybe we can take this question as when we have the roundup, and you all keep it in mind. So we collect 2 or 3 more inputs, and then we get back to the, oh, you're so tired. No, come on. It's too hot in here. Okay.
Hi, my name is Frank. Could I just ask what the Democratic governor of Delaware is doing on a panel about how to win back the hearts and minds of the ordinary voter, when Delaware is considered a tax haven in America and around the world, and the issue of paying one's fair share of taxes, especially by multinational corporations, is such a great one, which is much too little discussed. So perhaps you could answer that question.
Yeah, it's actually it's only considered a tax haven by people who are unfamiliar with the real situation. Our taxes are no lower than they are elsewhere. The corporations choose to incorporate there because we have a body of law that has been well understood for a long time. It is absolutely, the taxes are, the corporate income taxes are no lower than they are elsewhere. In fact, perhaps we should even lower them.
Okay. In the end, there's another question behind there. Do progressives need like a common tax base? At least not, we won't reach it globally, but is there an aim for another way, or should we aim for another form of globalization where we have kind of the same taxes and we don't compete for the lowest denominator?
Well, I mean, I think a race to the bottom has become a big issue in our country, particularly when it comes to corporate subsidies.
Yeah.
And this is something that I did as other governors did. I think in an ideal world, these kinds of investments would be made into infrastructure, into education, and into workforce development. The problem is that if 1 or 2 governors choose to offer these kinds of corporate subsidies, then it's difficult to compete with one or both hands tied behind your back. So I think, in terms of should everybody have the same, that would be very much against the culture of our country, where we have 50 states. The states are laboratories of democracy. We can do things very, very differently, and in the end, we see which is more successful. And if another state is having more success, then perhaps there's something about it that we borrow from that state.
Okay, we leave it there. Any other question?
Yes, hello. My name is Alessandro, and I would like to pick up where the gentleman from Hungary left, and he said that there is a conflict between loyalty for the people, which is maybe a term which nowadays in Western Europe is also a bit frightened upon, on one hand, and on the other hand, globalization, global companies. And I would actually like to ask my party friend Stephan this question, because while representing, of course, the people of Lower Saxony, he also represents Volkswagen. And you talked a lot about credibility. I would like to know how you reconcile these two stakeholders, which you have to represent both, and how do you want to fight for credible social cohesion? Thank you.
Okay, we pick one more question, and then we start with you. Is there anybody else? Otherwise, we kind of, yeah, there's.
Hi, thanks very much. Jakob, a concerned scientist. Just a quick question. I think it's a dangerous development and an oversight to associate climate change and that sustainability discussion only with the Green Party. Because climate change is a subject that touches all sorts of issues, social issues, economic issues, and also natural issues. So where are the Social Democrats with a strong position on achieving climate change mitigation and at the same time a just transition to a sustainable future? Why is everybody looking to the Green Party to provide solutions there? I'm not hearing the Social Democrats.
All right. I once learned when I started my career as a journalist that you have to be able to answer every question in 2 minutes. You have to explain the world in 2 minutes. The answer to this question could take you hours. So who's going to start? And keep in mind the other question as well. How can you include voters and enable them instead of giving them the feeling that they can't cope with change? Who wants to start? Stephan, why?
Well, I tried to combine the last and the question before. Let's explain shortly. Lower Saxony has, for historical reasons, 20% of the shares of the world's largest car manufacturing company, Volkswagen, VW. And that's why the Prime Minister is traditionally part or member of the supervisory board. And I feel everybody of you know that this is a company which is not only highly important, not only for Lower Saxony, but for a European company, but also in trouble now for 3.5 years because of Dieselgate. And of course, I was always asked in this time, how can you combine your task as a member of the supervisory board and as a prime minister of the country? And the answer is, there is one lesson from Dieselgate. There is no strategy, no successful strategy for a company outside of law and common sense. And since 3.5 years, this company, which is with more than 660,000 employees, one of the largest of the world, is changing itself fundamentally. And that's the link to the other question, whether a social democrat who can, a practical example. Now, the world's largest car manufacturer is the world's #1 in changing his company's products to an environmental fitted strategy. I give you an example. In Lower Saxony now there are 2 plants, I think I was talking about 2 plants, who are now fully electrified, which means with a loss of 7,000 jobs. This you have to explain. And you have to explain this in a way that people understand why their jobs are lost, but you have to explain as well what will go on with them. In this case, we can do so. And that is credibility also in a situation which is not easy. I wasn't sure before my election, my last election, whether all the voters in Lower Saxony would see it in the same way like I do. And I was very happy they did, and that's why I go on in this direction.
Marije, do you have any quick advice how to win back people and give them the feeling that it's not everything is decided above their heads?
No, I think, so first of all, about the climate change, this is a very important part of our manifesto. So we have been working on a manifesto for the European elections, doing consultations with our members in all the 28 states, online and offline, to have a short, to-the-point manifesto, which is like the guideline for the next 5 years in European Parliament. And this, I think, has been decided very democratically. So I want people to remember that the European Parliament is not a body you can vote for in a couple of weeks, which is taking decisions above your head. You will vote for people, for example, from the SPD representing you in that European Parliament, in the S&D group, who are then representing progressives in Europe. And you can hold them accountable because in 5 years' time they have to run again for elections. And the next 5 years you can use to have a proper dialogue with these people, because I think people elected in a parliament, in a European Parliament, are human beings who shall have a conversation with their voters. So grab the opportunity and do that. Then I think we have to become more inclusive. I already said that earlier today, but I think this is really, really important. And when I look at this audience tonight, I'm very proud to see so many women, to see people from different ethnic backgrounds, to see young people. I think it's encouraging. But I just want to make one remark. It's a pity that only guys are here asking questions. So I think, sorry, in the next round, yeah, but you and me, we are two women, but there's a room full of women who have very good questions, and I think we have to offer more space for people to participate in our structures, because if we want to change, we cannot only go for policy, we also have to talk about communication, we also have to talk about representation. And I think it's really, really important that if you want to have this movement, let's say, the progressive movement, to become stronger, we have to become more inclusive. It's very, very important. My last point is, on the policy side, there was something said about tax havens. I think we have to continue the fight against tax havens, even step it up, because we can have a debate about shall we synchronize all taxes everywhere. I think it's a nonsense debate, because it will not bring us anywhere in the end. What will bring us somewhere is that everybody has to pay its fair share. It's not fair that after the economic crisis, it's still possible for some people to park their money in some tropical paradises, drive our roads, bring the kids to our schools, go to our hospitals, and make us all pay, and not pay themselves. That's not solidarity. So I think if we want to have more money for education, for infrastructure, for healthcare, for elderly care, then we should not look into all kind of, let's say, difficult measures. We just make sure that everybody is going to pay their fair share. And this is something Social Democrats are heavily promoting in the next 5 years. And I hope that you will all vote for a Social Democratic Party, because then we can change.
Into campaigning. Thomas.
When I was talking about whether we are serving globalization or our people, our voters, I think in this situation I have to ask back, what should a Prime Minister of Low Saxony should do in this situation? Saving the jobs of the people as a Social Democrats, or close the company and say, hi, I'm green? This is a big conflict, yes, and I don't want to be cynical, but look, the only good solution, what I heard, but I don't know the details, if you can save the job and force the company not to lie, cheat, and blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, I think our good old supporters in this unsure world want somebody who can protect them. Many guests talked about it prior. Who can guide them, who can lead them, who can protect them. So if you see Trump, if you see Orban, they show that they can lead, and they created a false politics about how you should, as a voter, as a resident, fear, not scare, fear from, for example, in Hungary, the non-existent migrants. In this situation, leftists also, progressives also have to understand that in a war, because it's war, ladies and gentlemen, you have to I'm not sure use, but to know the tools of your enemy. Because if we do, and if we use the good old tools, what we did, we will fall everywhere. And this is my warning to everybody else. And just as the last word, you don't know, but I just lived in this 10 years in this country, my country, where I grow up from 1990, I grew up in a democratic country. I lived so little in the socialism, so-called socialism. You know, they say freedom is like air you breathe. You only feel how important it is when you cannot breathe. And we are dying in this country. And democracy and institutions of democracy are the same. Everybody takes it granted. In whole Western Europe, in the United States, everybody took it granted in Hungary also. And when you cannot get your right in a court, when you are kicked out from a company because of your political view, and I can go on, then you realize what I'm talking about. So please, Greens, Reds, Liberals, everybody who are for what we believe in, we have to cooperate and we have to fight against these populists all around the world.
I would actually say those were great final words. One of the reasons why we love Americans, even though it might be a cliche, Governor, is that you always find an optimistic note to kind of lead us into the rest of the evening. Is there anything you would like to add? I know it's a tough job.
Well, look, I think this is an unbelievably important conversation. I think so long as we're open to learning from each other, we will do well. And I think we should take nothing for granted, but I really do feel like in 2 years we'll be having a very different conversation about what's taking place in our country.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you. So, wish you a great evening. Have fun, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.